One of the most painful things in love is realizing that someone can feel something real for you and still not come closer. That contradiction breaks people, because if someone feels deeply, then surely the relationship should move forward. Surely the warmth should become consistency. Surely the connection should become clearer instead of more confusing. Surely care should look like closeness. But sometimes it does not. Sometimes a woman feels the bond very deeply and still stays guarded, still stays hesitant, still stays hard to reach, still keeps part of herself somewhere you cannot follow. And when that happens, the other person often starts going a little crazy trying to make it make sense. You keep asking yourself the same question in different forms. If she cares, why does she hold back? If she misses me, why does she stay distant? If the connection is real, why am I the one feeling like I keep carrying it alone? Today, I want to walk through why someone can feel deeply and still stay distant, what is usually happening underneath that pattern, and why deep feeling does not always turn into emotional availability. Stay with me until the end, because the last part is the one people resist the most. It is also the part that can save you from spending months, sometimes years, trying to turn someone's depth into something they still do not have the capacity to give. The first thing to understand is that deep feeling and emotional availability are not the same thing. People confuse these two all the time because emotionally, it seems like they should belong together. If someone feels a lot, then they should show a lot. If someone is moved by you, then they should come toward you. If someone cares, then the bond should become easier to trust. But that is not how people always work. A person can feel deeply and still be defended. They can feel attached and still be avoidant. They can care intensely and still not know how to stay open. They can be emotionally affected by you and still experience closeness as pressure, fear, exposure, or loss of control. That is what makes these connections so confusing. The feeling is not the problem. The feeling may actually be very real. The problem is what happens after the feeling arrives. Whether the person can hold it, act on it, communicate through it, and stay emotionally present once the bond begins asking more of them. A lot of people can feel. Far fewer people can sustain. And if you do not understand that difference, you will keep mistaking emotional intensity for emotional readiness. One reason someone can feel deeply and still stay distant is because closeness threatens their sense of control. Some people feel safest when they are the ones managing the distance, managing the pace, managing how much they reveal, managing how much access another person gets to their heart. The moment they start feeling too much, they do not automatically relax into it. They start trying to regulate it. Now they are aware you matter. Now they are aware the bond has weight. Now they are aware they are not as detached as they wanted to be. And instead of moving closer, they often react by tightening up. Not because the feeling is weak, but because it is strong enough to disrupt the version of themselves that felt composed and in control. This is why deep feeling can sometimes create more distance instead of less. The feeling makes the connection more dangerous to them emotionally. It raises the stakes. It increases the risk of needing, hoping, depending, grieving, or being hurt. So rather than surrendering to the bond, they start managing it more carefully. From your side, that distance feels like contradiction. From their side, it may feel like self-protection. That does not make it fair, but it does explain why someone can feel a lot and still not move toward you in a clean, secure way. Another reason is that some people are comfortable with longing, but not with relationship. This is something many people never realize until they have lived through it. There are people who can feel deeply in private. They can miss you deeply, think about you deeply, romanticize you deeply, even ache for you deeply. But the actual emotional demands of a real relationship feel much harder for them than the feeling itself. Why? Because longing is internal. Relationship is interactive. Longing lets them stay in control of the story. They get to feel without always having to respond. They get to imagine without always having to show up. They get to carry emotion without necessarily having to build trust, communicate clearly, tolerate conflict, or become consistent. Real closeness asks for things that private feeling does not. It asks for vulnerability in real time, accountability, reassurance, steadiness. The ability to stay emotionally open even when things become inconvenient, uncertain, or intense. And some people, for all the depth of what they feel, are simply more comfortable with the ache of wanting than the responsibility of relating. That is why someone can stay emotionally attached to you and still remain distant. Because feeling is one thing, relationship is another. There is also the question of shame. Some people do not only fear closeness, they feel ashamed by how much they feel, ashamed of their need, ashamed of how affected they are, ashamed of how much power another person suddenly has to move them. So instead of letting the feeling soften them, it makes them harder to reach. They may replay their own tenderness and feel embarrassed by it. They may open up one day and then feel exposed the next. They may realize they miss you more than they want to admit and then respond by becoming colder, quieter, more distant, because distance helps them hide from the intensity of their own attachment. This is why some of the coldest behavior can come from people who are actually emotionally activated. Not because coldness is proof of love, and not because every distant person is secretly overwhelmed, but because shame can turn deep feeling into self-protective withdrawal very fast. And when shame enters the picture, the person is not just managing the bond. They are managing their own image of themselves inside the bond. They want to feel less exposed, less needy, less transparent, less emotionally visible. So they create space. Not because nothing is there, but because too much is there, and they do not know how to hold it without feeling weak. Another reason someone stays distant even when they feel deeply is that the bond may be colliding with old emotional conditioning. I want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who supports Soft Mind. Every cup I share with you, like this Chloe the Cat mug, reminds me of how this community grew from one quiet idea into something warm and real. Each Chloe the Cat item helps me keep creating these videos, so if you'd like to support the channel, you can grab your own cozy mug at colabbmusic.com. Thank you for being part of this calm space. If closeness once meant pain, control, disappointment, engulfment, betrayal, or emotional instability, then real feeling in the present does not arrive in a neutral system. It arrives in a body and mind already trained to associate attachment with danger. That means when the bond deepens, their system may not interpret that deepening as safety. It may interpret it as the beginning of loss, the beginning of pressure, the beginning of being overwhelmed, the beginning of being unable to get themselves back once another person matters too much. This is why people can genuinely love connection and still react badly to it once it starts becoming real. The heart may want closeness, while the nervous system fears what closeness usually costs. And when that split exists, the person often becomes inconsistent. They move toward you when they feel the longing. They move away when the longing becomes too real. They open when they miss you. They close when they realize how much you can affect them. That cycle is deeply confusing if you are on the receiving end, because you feel the sincerity in their warmth and the reality in their distance. Both feel true, and the truth is, for them, both often are. But sincerity still does not equal capacity. That is the part you can never afford to forget. This is where a lot of people become trapped in a dangerous kind of hope. They sense the feeling underneath the distance, so they tell themselves the distance is temporary. They think, if I can just stay patient, stay soft, stay understanding, eventually the depth will win. Eventually her feelings will become stronger than her fear. Eventually the bond will break through the wall. Sometimes people do grow. Sometimes walls do come down. But many people waste an enormous amount of their life waiting for depth to become availability on its own. And it does not always happen, because deep feeling does not automatically heal avoidance. It does not automatically create relational skill. It does not automatically build honesty, consistency, or courage. Someone can feel everything and still remain largely unchanged in how they handle connection. That is why you have to stop asking only whether the feeling is there. The better question is whether the feeling is being translated into anything that can actually support a healthy bond. Is it becoming clearer, more stable, more emotionally responsible, more willing to be named, more willing to stay present after vulnerability? Or is it staying trapped inside a pattern that leaves you doing all the interpretation while they keep all the emotional protection? That distinction matters more than people want it to. So how can you tell when someone feels deeply but still stays distant? Usually, you will notice emotional charge without emotional steadiness. There is depth in the moments, in the eye contact, in the tenderness, in the silence, in the way they remember things, in the way they react when you pull back, in the way they seem affected by your presence in ways that go beyond simple indifference. But then there is also distance, hesitation, guardedness, delays, cooling off after meaningful moments, a reluctance to define what is clearly being felt, a pattern of keeping the bond alive without fully stepping into it. That combination is what makes the connection so powerful and so exhausting, because the feeling keeps giving you evidence that something real exists, while the distance keeps denying you the security that something real is actually being built. And when you live inside that long enough, you start surviving on emotional fragments. You become highly sensitive to small signs of warmth. You overvalue brief moments of openness. You start building hope out of nuance because the direct thing you actually need is still not being given. That is when the relationship stops being a relationship and starts becoming an interpretation habit. And no matter how deep the feeling is underneath it, that is not a safe place to live for long. So, what do you do if you know she feels deeply, but she still stays distant? First, believe the distance as much as you believe the depth. This is one of the hardest emotional disciplines there is, because the depth is often what your heart wants to privilege. It feels more romantic, more meaningful, more worth waiting for. But if the distance is persistent, then it is also part of the truth. And ignoring it will not make the connection healthier. Second, stop assuming that understanding her pain obligates you to stay inside its consequences. You can have compassion for why someone is distant and still admit that their distance is hurting you. You can understand their fear and still refuse to build a life around their inconsistency. Third, look at movement, not potential, not chemistry, not late-night tenderness. Movement. Is she becoming more honest over time, more open, more accountable, more emotionally available? Or are you still living in the same cycle of depth and distance, warmth and withdrawal, hope and confusion? Because if the pattern is not moving, then the feeling is not enough. The deepest truth is this: some people do feel deeply. They feel more than they know how to say, more than they know how to hold, more than they know how to turn into something steady. They may love you in ways that are emotionally real and still not know how to build a bond that feels safe to live inside. That is tragic, but it is not rare. And if you do not understand this, you will keep waiting for depth to become a relationship just because it feels meaningful. But meaningful and workable are not the same thing. Real feeling and real availability are not the same thing. Being affected and being ready are not the same thing. So if she feels deeply but still stays distant, do not reduce the bond to something fake just because it hurts. But do not romanticize the distance into something sustainable either. You are allowed to recognize the truth of what she feels and still ask whether what she gives is enough to protect your peace. If this episode gave language to something you have been trying to understand, let me know in the comments which part hit the hardest. And if you want more calm, honest conversations about love, attachment, mixed signals, and emotional clarity, subscribe to Soft Mind. Some people stay distant because they do not feel much. But some people stay distant because they feel so much that closeness stops feeling safe. And if you do not know the difference, you can spend a very long time calling emotional depth a promise that was never actually being kept.